Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a fascinating source text that completely flips the script on traditional narratives about light, darkness, and obedience. We're looking at a text which argues that our most ancient stories have been heavily, purposefully manipulated to keep us small. It's a pretty wild ride, so let's get into it.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the concept of the scribe's iron, then journey through 4 parables: the king's flattened prism, Atar and the empty throne, the boundary of night, and embracing the Jungian shadow. Finally, we'll wrap up with the mirror of your erasure.
Section 1. The Scribe's Iron. Interestingly, the primary antagonist in this text isn't some literal monster with fangs or claws. Instead, it's a concept. The source material introduces us to this idea of the scribe's iron. It's basically a historical tool, a mechanism of narrative control used by those in power to literally flatten out the messy, uncontainable truths of the threshold. Take a complex, tragic figure like the ancient deity Atar, for example. According to the text, this iron was used to weave his rich history into a one-dimensional narrative of shame, all to keep social order tidy and our psychological borders incredibly small.
The text actually puts it this way, and this is quite a striking quote. It argues that institutional forces use the scribe's iron to grind down the spectrum of existence into a cage of obedience. It's a really powerful way to describe how humanity's vast potential was allegedly forced into a tiny, binary box by those seeking control.
Section 2. The king's flattened prism. Now, this brings us to the first of 4 parables, setting a very vivid scene right at the edge of a kingdom.
Picture this magnificent prism sitting on a palace threshold. First, the text describes it catching the light and fracturing it into this beautifully messy, uncontainable spectrum, representing every complex impulse of the human heart. But second, the high scribe sees this and absolutely panics over the cognitive dissonance it creates. So, step 3, he takes his iron tools and systematically flattens the prism down. He completely destroys the complexity.
This text illustrates a pretty tragic outcome here. You've got this original, uncontainable spectrum of human experience on one hand, and what the scribe leaves us with on the other. Just pure white for absolute obedience, and total black for eternal damnation. The source asserts that the original Lightbringer was trapped in this binary cage, and because of that, our ancestors lost all the profound wisdom found in the colors living in between.
Section 3. Atar and the empty throne. Moving to our second parable, we look up into the ancient Ugaritic sky to explore the story of Atar.
For centuries, we've heard this story about a cosmic figure trying to steal heaven's throne, but the source text frames it completely differently, contrasting the true motive against a weaponized myth. Instead of a simplistic children's fable of disobedience, the text argues that Atar was driven by a really beautiful, singular impulse to reach across cosmic boundaries and just discover what was possible. The author suggests the scribe created the false narrative specifically to ensure everyday people never dared to scale the heights themselves. So the author makes a crucial point about reclaiming this story. When Atar actually reached that 5th throne, he realized the seat was just too vast for him. So what did he do? He willingly stepped down and returned to the earth. The text argues this wasn't some sinful, prideful fall, but a mature recognition of natural limitation. It frames this as the natural completion of a cosmic cycle, a cycle the scribe's iron allegedly erased.
Section 4. The boundary of night. This leads perfectly into our third parable, which focuses on the deepest hours of darkness.
The text gives us this incredible image of the morning star standing defiantly at the boundary of night and day, refusing to belong solely to either side. It stands there as a beacon of hope in the deepest hours, signaling the, quote, womb of the dawn. It represents a promise that light is coming, born directly out of the deepest dark.
But again, the text argues that institutional voices just couldn't handle that level of complexity. They took the transitional nature of the threshold, that gray area between night and day, and flattened it out using the iron of language. They branded this transitional stance as a strict binary of rebellion, the implication being, well, if you aren't fully in the light, you must absolutely be a rebel of the dark.
And the practical consequence of this? Well, the text argues that the scribe essentially taught us to constantly retreat to the safety of the day. By framing the threshold as a place of rebellion, we were conditioned to fear the very darkness that is literally necessary for our own personal illumination. We became terrified of the dark we actually need to see the stars. Section 5. Embracing the Jungian Shadow. For this fourth parable, the explainer shifts gears from ancient myth into deep personal psychology to see how this affects us internally. We're talking about the Jungian shadow here. This represents our inner darkness, our hidden struggles, the chaotic impulses we all have. The source text tells a story of a traveler who was terrified of a falling star, but only because he was projecting his own unacknowledged inner darkness onto it. The psychological concept is that when we actually integrate this shadow, we become whole and therefore completely uncontainable by external narratives. The text presents a really clear choice here. True growth actually comes from facing that inner darkness head-on. But the scribe wants us seeking this artificial purity instead. The author claims the scribe deliberately turned the shadow into a brand of infamy so that people would repress their struggles. Because if you're busy fighting a simple narrative of damnation, the argument goes, you stay small, manageable, and obedient.
Section 6. The Mirror of Your Erasure. We've reached the climax of our explainer, where the source text delivers its ultimate critique.
The text introduces a really fascinating mechanism called linguistic narrowing. Think about the Latin roots, lux, meaning light, and fere, meaning to bring or carry, the light bringer. The text argues that institutions literally weaponized these roots. They took a complex cosmic story, narrowed it linguistically, erased the origins of figures like Atar, and replaced the whole thing with a brand of shame that you likely know all too well today.
Which brings us to the paradox of dissent. The text argues that these supposedly dark, mythic figures are actually speaking to us from the threshold, reminding us that light literally has no meaning without the darkness they inhabit. According to the text, they aren't the enemy at all. They represent the only bridge we have left to a unified cosmic cycle. A cycle the author says we've spent centuries trying to forget thanks to the scribe's iron tools.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. As we look at these flattened myths, the text challenges us with a massive question. Are we clinging to lazy, binary comfort zones simply because we're too cowardly to integrate the shadow of our own ambition? Are we, in our own lives, picking up the scribe's iron and wielding it against ourselves? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the narratives hidden in the threshold.